Hey, what's going on? Another real life story for you. This one, I do want to give you a warning. This has probably gonna have some cursing in it, and this also involves a lot of things with race as well. So, just as a little warning, to throw that little disclaimer out there for you. So where I left off in my last real life video was I had just lived 3 years in Daytona from the age of 15 and a half to almost 3 years, 15 and a half till about 18 years old. Uh, didn't know anything about life. Learned a lot living in Daytona. Pretty much it molded me into the person who I am today. And I had went through the apprenticeship program for cutting meat at Winn-Dixie. I was making great money now. I was making 18 bucks an hour. And then after about 6 months, I was promoted to an assistant manager. And I had the opportunity to move back to the county that I had originally moved away from at 15 to move to Daytona Beach. And I took the promotion. And it was a little place on the border of Cocoa and Rockledge, Florida. And I really didn't know anything about it. I mean, I knew it was there. Brevard County's it's a huge county, but there's some places that you hear of and places you don't hear of. But I had heard of Rockledge and Cocoa. I mean, on the, obviously Cocoa, then there's Cocoa Beach, which is on the actual coast. Cocoa's more inland. And I was promoted to a store that needed a lot of help that was on the border of Cocoa and Rockledge. That's all I knew. So I decided to go for it. And still by this point, I haven't talked to my parents in 2.5, 3 years. So, and I was kind of still in the mad at my parents or hate my parents mode still as well, because, how could you throw a 15-year-old kid out into the lion's den? But I was okay. I learned a lot about life by this point. So I was still kind of in the hating my parents mode. Do I want to reach out to them? I did reach out to my grandmother by this point. And she was mad at me. And she chewed me out. And I didn't even talk to her for 2.5 years, which was horrible because I loved her very much. And she took care of me when my family moved to Florida and my dad was still in the service and stuff. We moved out here first. And then, my parents and stuff moved out here as well. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But I loved her very much. And in fact, if I had a choice as a kid to live with my parents or my grandmother, I probably would have chose my grandmother. Just because, I mean, my parents were amazing. Don't ever misconstrue anything I'm saying. It was just at a point in my life as a little kid to where she was just everything. I was like the only thing for her. And she was like, that's all we had was like her and I. And here I'm, a little kid in, kindergarten and first grade being moved. And there were no schools for all of this massive, employment that just started taking place out for the space shuttle program. And that's why my parents are there, my aunt, my cousin, my grandmother, everybody. So I just, I had just become so fond of her. And she was just absolutely mad at me. I mean, that was the first time she ever cussed at me or anything. And so that really got me thinking about, should I talk? But she didn't say anything. She just said, you need to, talk to your parents. And, she said, you need to come and, see me. And she says, how dare you? And I told her, I'm like, look, Dad told me not to ever contact anyone again. I was trying to put the blame on him. But ultimately, it was my fault because I could have done a lot of things differently, but I just ran away. I just didn't want to have to deal with my dad because of my dad. I was scared of my dad. My dad only beat me one time as a kid, and that was because I shot out every street light in the neighborhood with a BB gun. I deserved it, and that was the only time I ever got disciplined. I never wanted that again. That's a whole nother story. So But yeah, do I see my parents? Do I reach out to them? My grandmother didn't tell me anything about it. So I needed a place to live, right? And I had a week's vacation, which was the first time I had ever had a vacation. And I had a week. I had like 10 days to move. So I got everything, got moved, and I moved to Cocoa/Rockledge. And I did not know what I was getting myself into. I'm going to be honest. I did not know that the apartments because there again, Thrifty Nickel, I found this place through Thrifty Nickel. And I mean, this place is like $250 a month. I'm like, this is like a steal. So I went and, told them, yeah, I'm going to be moving there. And I agreed to it. And when I didn't know what it was, I got an address. So I moved in. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, this is going to be different. But I needed a place to live. I needed a place to move to. And I actually moved into the projects, which I had no clue that it was the projects. I had no clue. And I'm not going to say the name of it or anything like that. But I quickly noticed that when I moved in, I was out of place, that's for sure. And when I was moving in, a guy came up to me. His name was James. He was the first person that I met there. And James came up to me and he started immediately asking me why I was moving in there. And I basically told him, I said, hey, look, I just got promoted to my job. And then he's like, well, where do you work? He's just like, as soon as I answer, he's just like quickly asking me questions. And then I opened my mouth and I said, why the 50 questions? And he literally told me, he goes, because I don't trust white people. And he was a black guy. And he goes, because I don't trust black people. And he says, I don't trust white people. And you're the only white person in here. So by this point, I am totally intimidated, and he's right. I am like the only white kid. I'm 18 years old now, and I mean, I had, I played football. I knew a lot of black people in high school. I got along with, the people on the football team, the black kids on the football team in class, etc. I had no problem with any color on a person. I was not raised with hate. So I didn't care, but I noticed real quickly that I was probably not welcome here. And then as James kind of went away, and I remember he lived right next to me. I lived looking straight out of my place. He lived to the left of me. He was the very first place to the left. And he had a big grill or smoker out on his porch, and he was cooking. So he went over there and he was messing with stuff, and then he came back, and then just out of nowhere, I asked him, I said, hey, how's it going? He goes, you're probably a cop. And I said, I'm not no cop. I said, I cut meat. I said, I'm a meat cutter. I said, I ain't no cop. And then I asked him, I said, what do you do? And he says, I don't do anything. He goes, nobody's going to hire me. And he was like such a dick to me. I mean, seriously, he was such a dick. And by this point, I know that this guy is like, he's an alpha male. And he had a couple kids too. He had a son and a daughter because they were out there talking to him. But he thought I was a cop. I mean, what a way to start, an hour of being in my new apartment, right? I mean, he thought I was a cop. But I knew after the first day that I was there, first couple of days, I knew that he was a dealer for sure. There's no doubt about it. In fact, he even carried a pistol, and he carried it right in front of his shorts. But after a couple of days, I realized that he was the alpha male of these projects. But he wasn't a bad guy. I'm not saying that at all. James is actually a great guy. And he ran the project building that I lived at. And he looked after everyone. And, you know, a lot of people, I always saw him talking to people. So, but he and I got off on the wrong foot. I thought we did. But I'm thinking, wow, if I just signed a year lease, here I'm like, I can't even sleep my first night here in this place. And I'm thinking, what did I get myself into? I'm not wanted here, just because of my skin color. And, I'm hearing couples fighting, people outside fighting and yelling. I thought I heard gunshots, which come to find out I did, because where I lived at, it was right on the border of Rockledge and Cocoa, like I said. Well, I lived in this little area called Little Vietnam, and it was called Little Vietnam for a reason. And at night, there was so much gang activity. So you would hear gunshots all the time. And I was just sitting in my bed going, what did I just get myself into? I just signed a year lease. Nobody likes me here. I'm like afraid to leave my apartment. But I mean, my vacation ended. I got all moved in. And a couple days later, I was back at work. And I'm working and I'm setting up my meat case and all that other stuff. And then all of a sudden, who comes around the corner? James. He comes around the corner and he starts looking at the meat case. And he looks over at me and he looks down at the meat case. And I went out and I said, hey, how's it going? I said, James, right? And he says, yeah. And I said, told you. I said, I'm a meat cutter. And he goes, well, I'm just checking to see if you're not a cop. And I'm thinking, I said, James, I can't win with you. And he says, I just don't trust people. And first he told me he didn't trust white people. And, but hey, I don't blame him. I mean, seriously, I honestly, I don't blame him, because he told me later on, after we had gotten, more comfortable with each other, he told me a lot of stories that I will not talk about on this stream. But now that I think about it, I don't blame him. So I worked that day, and we had some like stuff on sale. We had I think we had like chicken wings on sale. We had leg quarters on sale. So I bought a bunch of meat that was on sale, and I was going to give it to him because I know that he's on that smoker every single day, and it smells so good. And here I'm like, I can cook like ramen noodles and spaghetti and stuff. And so I bought a bunch of this stuff, and I knocked on his door, and he was home, and I had some bags, and I said, hey man, it's me again. I said, I hope I'm not bothering you. And he goes, no, you're all right. He said, come on in. So I said, hey, I brought some stuff home. I said, this stuff's on sale, and you're always smoking on your smoker. I said, it smells like you're a great cook. I said, I bought some stuff for you. I said, we got off on the wrong foot. And then, of course, I opened my mouth and I said, I think we got off on the wrong foot. And then I said, here, let's start over again. I said, I'm David. I stuck my hand out, and he actually shook my hand. And, yeah, he said, come on in. And, he kind of showed me around his place. I mean, he had a beautiful place. I mean, he was totally Victorian. He had all kinds of like old vinyl paintings on the wall, and he had a velvet Elvis. I was like, you got a velvet Elvis? And he said, yeah. He goes, I like Elvis. And I was like, yeah. So that's all I used to hear growing up. My mom, that's all she would play. And he said, there's a reason for that. And I was like, yeah. So that night, I gave him like these wings, these leg quarters, and I think like a Boston butt roast or something like that. And a couple hours later, I was like nodding off on the couch, and then my door knocked, and it was him, and he had a plate with foil over it. And I wasn't expecting anything like that. And he goes, "Hey, I just made some dinner and I figured you'd like to have some, seeing that you paid for it." And I'm like, "Well, I didn't." I said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I was just trying to break the ice a little bit with you." And so yeah, he cooked the chicken leg quarters. Oh my gosh, they were amazing. I mean, the meat just like fell off the bone. It was so good. And there was like some rice and some beans and some greens. And I hadn't had greens since my grandmother would make greens for like Easter and stuff like that. And she would put brown sugar in it. And I said, "Oh my gosh, greens." And he goes, "You don't like greens?" And I was like, "No, I love greens." And I said, "I haven't had it for years because my grandmother would make greens and stuff for the holidays." And so we just kind of sat outside. I didn't have a chair, but he got a chair for me, and we sat outside, and I was eating, and I just kept like moaning and stuff. He said, "You ain't had good food." And I'm like, I said, "Not like that." I said, and then I told him, "Look, man," I said, "I've been, living on my own, living on ramen noodles, going to Denny's and IHOP. And I said, I haven't had a meal like this in years." And he's like, "Yeah, anytime you want to buy anything," he said, "you bring it and I'll cook it." And he said, "That'll be a good trade-off." And I said, "Done." Every week I brought him all kinds of stuff. And he's like, he even told me one time, he said, "Get some oxtails if you can." I said, "All right." So I brought, and that was the first time that actually, it was the second time I had oxtails, because I had a customer that actually brought in oxtails to me one time, and they were amazing. And man, I had so much Creole food that it was hard for my system to adjust, because I wasn't used to those types of spices and everything. But it was so good. James, he was a barbecue master. He was one hell of a chef. And he made this barbecue sauce that he called it brown sugar barbecue sauce. And literally, I mean, I watched him make it one time, and he dumped like half a bag of brown sugar. It was so good. And then he had other stuff in it too. And that's what he would coat on just about anything that he was doing chicken wise. He always put it on there. And he taught me how to cook as well, because I didn't know how to cook. My dad did all that. My mom did all that. And he taught me how to cook. He taught me how to cook ribs. And he says, "You got to be patient with this stuff." He goes, "You can't just," because I bought a little grill and put it in front of my place, and he banged on my door, and I answered it, and he goes, "Your heat's way up, way too high." He goes, "I turned it down for it." So basically, when I was in my place letting this stuff burn or cook, he opened up the grill and he saw the fire was up way too high, so he backed it down, flipped the meat for me, and he says, and that's when he started showing me how to cook, on the grill and stuff. And man, I was so appreciative of that. And I used to go through probably a tank of gas every couple of weeks of propane gas, because I would cook hamburgers, hot dogs, and whatever I cooked, I took it over to him, and I would like give it to his kids and stuff. And yeah, James he was a cool guy, but I knew that he was doing things but I never said anything. I didn't care. It didn't involve me, right? So, but I'd say I'd probably had lived there for maybe about 3 or 4 months. And I warmed up to him basically. And, like I said, we would sit outside, we'd talk and stuff, and he'd tell me every single thing about every single person that lived in our building. And it was like a horseshoe building as well. I can't get away from these horseshoes from where I used to work in a horseshoe complex in Daytona Beach, and now I lived in a horseshoe complex. And he would tell me every single thing about every single person and what they had going on and everything. So James knew everything about everybody in this place. And come to find out, he was literally running the project, but there was never any problems. There was never any, policemen there. And he actually told me, I asked him, I said, did you really think I was a cop? And he said, yeah, he thought that I was an undercover cop that they moved in there to bust him. And because I asked him, I'm like, well, I said, what are you doing that's going to get you busted? He goes, well, we're not going to talk about that. And I said, all right, that's fine. But I mean, after months, I mean, I was, I'd like give him a ride. If he needed to go to the grocery store, if he needed to go pay bills or something like that, I'd take him. So, because he used to call a cab, or because I saw a cab out there one day picking him up. And then when I saw him later in the evening, I'm like, were you calling a cab? And he said, yeah. He says, I always take a cab when I need to go pay my bills and stuff. And I was like, don't call a cab. I said, just ask me. I'll take you. And he's like, you do that? I was like, yeah, just whatever. Give me a couple bucks for gas and I'll take you wherever you need to go. So I would like take him to go, do his bills or something like that. But he had a sister and a cousin that would come over and they would take the kids and stuff. And then he actually let me watch his kids because he had to go out. So he would ask if I keep an eye on his kids for him for a couple hours, and I'd say, yeah, no problem. So they would come over and play Nintendo and stuff like that, and I'd just, let them do whatever. I wasn't no strict babysitter or anything. I was like, most of the time I was just like laying on the couch, falling asleep and stuff. So, but the one thing about him though was I thought he was gay, and because the only females that he had around were his cousin, like I mentioned, and his sister. But everybody else, it was always guys, which, I mean, I don't care. Who cares, right? And so come to find out, he was, but anyway, yeah. Well, one time, because I always wore like a tie and stuff like that. And I had to at work, that's just what we did at Winn-Dixie. And he said, for a white boy, he said, you look pretty good. And I'm thinking to myself, what? He is, you dress up nice. And I was like, all right. I didn't think of it, anything of it until later. But yeah, he was a quiet guy. He was a great guy, but I learned a lot in life from him as well. And he said, you don't, just like Don said, he says, you don't trust anybody. And, so James is a good guy. He definitely ran the place. He was definitely the alpha male of where I lived. And I had lived there for almost 2 years. And so I remember towards the end of where I lived. So looking out, James lived on the left. And then there's another guy that moved in after me, probably 6 months after I did. His name was Javier. He had like 4 kids. And he was married, and he was a Mexican guy, and his wife was Mexican, and all that. And he worked for the county, and he was a real nice guy. I mean, he worked like all day. I mean, he'd leave before the sun came up, and didn't get home till after the sun was down. And he actually got laid off from his job. I remember, and because me and James were sitting out talking, and he came out. And he was actually a smoker, so he would come out and smoke on the porch. And we were talking. He's like, "Yeah, I just lost my job. I got laid off." And I was like, "Oh man, that really really sucks." And so after a couple of weeks, I figured he probably already got something by now, another job. But I guess it was like maybe 2 weeks to a month later, and he knocked on my door, and he asked if he could have some ice cubes. He asked me if I had some ice cubes that he could have. I'm like, yeah, sure. Everything all right? And he goes, yeah, my power got shut off yesterday. And I was like, oh man. He goes, yeah, I owe like $100 and some, and I got to get it turned on. He goes, I got no job. So I offered to help him get his power turned back on. And he said, you do that? And I'm like, I said, yeah. I said, man, you can't go without power. I said, man, you got your kids over there and stuff. I said, I'll help you. And I said, do you have any money? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I got like $60. I said, well, how about I pay for half of it and we'll get your power turned on. So I gave him money and he went and got it, and they came out and turned his power back on. And so he was a nice guy. I mean, he couldn't help it. I mean, he got laid off. And then I asked him, I said, hey, I think we're hiring at work because he knew that I worked at Winn-Dixie. So I said, hey, if you don't mind working at Winn-Dixie, I said, I could probably talk to my store manager and get you a job. And he was so appreciative of that. And the next day I had a job for him working on the stock crew overnights. And then eventually he was so good that they actually promoted him to the night manager, which was pretty awesome. And, but yeah, I remember, I even got him some grocery. I mean, it wasn't a lot. I mean, it was like a lot of ramen noodle stuff and, Kool-Aid and stuff for his kids. And because I remember his kids would always be running around with those Kool-Aid rings on their mouths. So I know his kids like Kool-Aid. So I got him like sugar. I mean, it wasn't nothing expensive. I mean, it was whatever I could afford, but yeah, it was, I mean, it's your neighbor, I mean, he wasn't a bad guy or anything. So yeah, but I did that. And he actually, later on, they were going to move out because he was already, by this point, he was working at Winn-Dixie and everything. And he actually gave me money. And I said, I don't want you. I said, dude, you take this. I said, buy your wife or something, And he goes, no, man. He goes, we're in good shape. He goes, man, this is all because of you. And he goes, I really appreciate it. He goes, man, you helped me out big time. I was like, no, I said, you did it all yourself. So, but he wouldn't let me not take the money. So I did take the money. And, but yeah, Javier and his wife, he had a nice little lowrider truck too. And then he had a brother that would come over and hang out and stuff. And so, and I remember they would go down, they'd be down smoking marijuana in a truck and you could smell it and stuff. So, like I said, I had plenty of opportunities. I just never did anything like that. But yeah. But then James, Javier actually told James, because like I said, everybody went to James and about everything in that place, because like I said, he ran that place. And James, actually, we were sitting out on one night and he said, you know what? He goes, you're okay for a white boy. I said, what? I said, well, I'm glad. I said, because I thought he said that, but I didn't mentally, I just didn't think he said that, but he did say that. And he goes, yeah, you're okay for a white guy. And I was like, okay. I said, where'd that come from? And he goes, Javier told me that you got him some groceries and you helped him get his lights back on. And I was like, I mean, anybody would have done that. I was like, man, he's got a family and stuff. He got laid off. And he said, well, most people don't do that. And he goes, yeah, you're okay. And so that was pretty cool, because from where he and I had started was, man, I didn't know if I was going to get, booted out of there or what, but yeah, but I lived there for almost 2 years. And then I bought a trailer. I bought my first trailer. Well, that's a whole nother ordeal. Man, I might do a real life story on that. I haven't made up my mind on that though. But yeah, I learned I learned a lot about life living there. And then I also learned a lot about people as well, because, being a middle income white kid, that's pretty much who you're all around. And I mean, like I said, I had other friends that were Black and Mexican and Puerto Rican and stuff that I went to school and played football with, but that's nothing compared to living in a community where I'm the only person of a particular culture. And I actually learned a lot by living there. And, before I moved to El Paso, a couple of months before I moved to El Paso in 2018, I had seen James at the grocery store. And he was totally different than when I remembered him in, the early 90s. I mean, he was full blown. He was definitely gay, and he was with his partner as well, his boyfriend, and he introduced me to him and he remembered my name and we talked, we had a good time. And, he asked me if I had any good barbecues since his, and I said, no, not really. I said, yeah, I have, but it's not as good as yours. And I said, your barbecue sauce is amazing. But yeah, we had talked for like an hour inside of Walmart, and he like gave me a big hug and I gave him a big hug. And I said, man, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. So that's why I'm talking about him, is because I was going to do this years ago, But, you know, I got to moving and then I just kind of forgot about it. And I remembered him and I'm like, man, I did learn a lot from him. And yeah, he did take me under his wing and taught me a lot, but he taught me a lot about people and oh my goodness. So, but yeah, that's, you know, that's, I guess you could say part two of my life. I mean, I moved into a project building and I had no clue. And I got another great story for you that happened just a couple of months before I moved out of the projects. I'll also tell this story next time. And I mean, I couldn't make this stuff up. This stuff is so crazy, and you'll enjoy this next one. So yeah, let me know what you guys think and gals think down in the comments section. Yeah, James is a good guy. He was very intimidating at first. Holy cow. I didn't know what was going on. But yeah, if you like the content on the channel, please do me a huge favor. Give me a thumbs up. Also, if you like the content, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and clicking on that bell notification in the middle of the screen on the right hand side. So until next time, happy gaming and stay safe. Bye for now.